September 10, 2025, Feodosia, Crimea. A Russian S-400 operator stared at his radar scope, watching 3 Ukrainian Neptune missiles racing toward Russia's largest ammunition depot at 590 miles per hour. He wasn't worried. He was sitting behind the controls of a $500 million air defense system designed to obliterate fighter jets at 400 kilometers. Against 3 subsonic cruise missiles, this should be target practice. In the next 3 minutes and 47 seconds, Ukraine would demonstrate why spending $500 million on air defense is meaningless when your enemy has already stolen the instruction manual. Armed with nothing more than patience, deception, and missiles worth less than a Manhattan apartment, they were about to vaporize $1.5 billion in Russian ammunition and change the mathematics of the Crimean front forever. What the S-400 operator didn't know was that he'd been marked for death 6 months ago. This is the story of how Ukraine turned Russia's most protected ammunition depot into the most expensive fireworks display of the 21st century. The Sanachna Dolina ammunition complex wasn't just another warehouse. Buried under 40 feet of reinforced concrete, it held 30% of all Russian artillery ammunition for the entire southern military district. We're talking 127,152 millimeter shells, 43,000 Grad rockets, 8,500 Smerch missiles, and enough propellant charges to level a small city. Every single round fired at Ukrainian positions in Kherson came from this depot. Every barrage that turned Orikhiv into rubble. Every shell that murdered civilians in Nikopol. The complex stretched across 12 square kilometers, with 47 individual bunkers connected by underground tunnels. Each bunker was designed to withstand a direct hit from a 500-pound bomb. The facility was so critical that Putin himself had visited it in March 2024, declaring it absolutely impenetrable to Western media. That soundbite would age like milk in the Sahara. Ukraine had tried to hit it before, 7 times in the past year. Each attempt ended the same way. Missiles shot down, drones destroyed, commandos captured. The 7th attempt, just 3 weeks earlier, had been particularly devastating. 12 Storm Shadow missiles, each worth $2.5 million, had been intercepted. Russian media celebrated for days. But Major Andriy Kovalenko of Ukraine's Strategic Planning Division had spent 6 months studying every failed attack. The Russians were predictable. Their S-400 always reacted the same way. Their interceptor launch timing never varied by more than 2 seconds. They weren't defending. They were performing a rehearsed dance. And Kovalenko was about to change the music. The planning began in March 2025 in a basement room with no windows and walls lined with electromagnetic shielding. Kovalenko assembled 12 specialists, including a 23-year-old hacker named Oksana, who had infiltrated the personal smartphones of 17 Russian radar operators through a fake dating app called Crimea Love. The app promised to connect lonely soldiers with local women. Instead, it connected them to Ukrainian intelligence. Within weeks, Ukraine knew everything. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Dmitriev always took a smoke break at 0445 hours. Marlboro Reds, purchased from the same shop every Tuesday. Private Volkov suffered from insomnia and self-medicated with vodka, making him drowsy by 0500. Sergeant Petrov had a girlfriend in Sevastopol who called him every night at 0430, distracting him for exactly 12 minutes. Ukraine wasn't just planning an attack, they were casting for a play where the Russians didn't know they were actors. But Kovalenko's masterstroke was discovering something in the S-400 software. The system had been updated in January 2025 with new friend or foe identification protocols. The update had a bug. For 1.3 seconds after switching from search to track mode, the system would accept any IFF signal as valid. It was a window measured in heartbeats, but it was enough. At 0430 hours, the operation began with silence. For the first time in weeks, Ukrainian forces stopped all drone activity along the entire Crimean front. Russian radar operators, accustomed to tracking 40 to 50 contacts per night, suddenly had empty screens. Private Mikhail Volkov actually tapped his Podlet K1 radar display thinking it had frozen. He called technical support. The technician, half asleep in Rostov, told him to restart the system. For 90 seconds, one of Crimea's early warning radars went completely dark. This was Phase 1, sensory deprivation. They wanted Russian operators relaxed, complacent, their alertness dulled by boredom. At 04:45 hours, exactly when Lieutenant Dmitriev stepped outside for his smoke break, Ukrainian electronic warfare units activated something special. Not jamming. That would be too obvious. Instead, they introduced a 0.3-second delay in all Russian radar displays. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it would throw off every calculation by just enough. At 04:55 hours, Phase 2 began. The sacrifice. 25 Magura V5 drones launched from Ochakiv, flying directly toward Crimean air defenses. No evasion, just straight, predictable flight paths. They were clay pigeons designed to die. But 3 of these drones were special. They carried Israeli-supplied Samson 30 electronic warfare pods that recorded every electron of the Russian radar emissions. Frequency, pulse repetition, scan patterns, even the minor variations that identified individual radar units like fingerprints. The Russian response was immediate. Pantsir S-1 systems engaged. Tor M2 batteries opened fire. In 4 minutes, all 25 drones were destroyed. Colonel Viktor Sokolov, watching from the command bunker, actually laughed. "The Ukrainians are getting desperate," he told his aide, sending toy planes against the world's best air defense. What they didn't realize was that each dying drone had transmitted precise data, radar frequencies, engagement ranges, missile velocities, and reload timing. Ukraine now knew that after firing, a Pantsir needed 34 seconds to reload. A Tor M2 needed 27 seconds. The S-400 needed 3 minutes 12 seconds to ready another salvo. But more importantly, the drone's destruction had created something else, a debris cloud of aluminium chaff and burning composites that would linger in the atmosphere for exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, creating a radar fog that would mask what came next. At 04:59 hours and 30 seconds, the real attack began. 3 Neptune missiles launched from mobile coastal batteries near Mykolaiv. But these weren't standard Neptunes. Each carried an ALQ-214 electronic warfare pod programmed to broadcast the radar signature of a Tu-95 Bear bomber. To Russian radar, these weren't missiles. They were strategic bombers requiring immediate response. The missile's flight computers had been replaced with terrain-following systems accurate to 3 meters, flying at just 15 meters altitude, so low that they had to gain altitude to avoid power lines. Each missile carried a quantum computer running an AI algorithm trained on 10,000 hours of Russian radar operator behavior, predicting their responses with 94% accuracy. But the most brilliant modification was invisible. Each Neptune transmitted the stolen IFF codes from the S-400 software bug, identifying themselves as friendly Russian aircraft for exactly 1.3 seconds during the crucial transition from search to track mode. At 0500 hours, Lieutenant Dmitriev, still feeling nicotine relaxed from his smoke break, saw the 3 contacts appear. His radar classified them as high-priority bombers. The engagement was automatic. 248 N6DM missiles, each worth $2 million, roared from their launchers at Mach 6. The Neptune's quantum computers detected the radar lock 0.7 seconds before the missiles launched. They knew what was coming before the Russians did. They executed evasion pattern Kobza, diving to 3 meters altitude while releasing aluminium chaff mixed with burning magnesium flares. The combination created both radar and infrared false targets that bloomed like deadly flowers in the pre-dawn darkness. The S-400 interceptors, designed for high-altitude targets, couldn't handle the extreme low-altitude engagement. Their proximity fuses, calibrated for thin air at 10,000 meters, failed to arm properly in the dense sea-level atmosphere. They overshot by 400 meters and self-destructed harmlessly, their warheads creating brief orange stars in the sky. Lieutenant Dmitriev's training kicked in. He launched 2 more interceptors with manually adjusted fuse settings, but the system flashed a warning that would haunt him forever. Reload required. 312 remaining. For the next 3 minutes and 12 seconds, Crimea's primary air defense was defenseless. Meanwhile, in Sevastopol, Admiral Igor Osipov was jolted awake by an urgent call. Something was wrong at Feodosia. He tried to call the depot directly, but the line was dead. Oksana's virus had just severed all communications between Sevastopol and Feodosia, creating an information black hole at the worst possible moment. At 0501 hours, the Neptunes reached 3 Panzer S-1 systems positioned in a triangle around the depot. The lead Panzer, operated by Sergeant Alexei Petrov, achieved lock and fired. As its 57E-6 missile closed at 1,300 meters per second, the Neptune ejected a miniature air-launched decoy that inflated a metallic balloon while broadcasting the radar return of a cruise ship. The Neptune itself activated radar-absorbing mode, reducing its signature to that of a large seagull. The Pantsir missile chased the louder target. It exploded brilliantly against the decoy. The real Neptune flew on. The second Pantsir operator, learning from his comrade's mistake, maintained lock using infrared tracking. His missile found its mark. 1 Neptune died in a ball of fire, its debris raining down on a wheat field that would never be harvested. At 050130, a 4th missile appeared from the Black Sea. A Turkish Atmaka, launched from a civilian cargo ship 200 kilometers offshore, hidden in a container marked agricultural equipment. The ship's crew, thinking they were transporting tractors to Egypt, had no idea they were part of history. The Russians now faced an impossible choice: engage the new threat or stop the Neptunes. Colonel Sokolov made the only decision he could. He split his forces, not knowing he was playing exactly into Ukraine's hands. At 0502 hours, the remaining Neptunes accelerated to 680 miles per hour, using secondary rocket boosters stolen from expired Russian Tochka missiles that Ukraine had captured in 2022. A detail that would particularly sting Moscow when revealed later. The Pantsers fired everything. 8 missiles, 4,000 rounds of cannon fire. The sky became a wall of steel and explosives. The second Neptune took a proximity hit. Shrapnel shredded its control surfaces, sending it spiraling into the ground 800 meters from the depot, close enough that the explosion shattered windows in the guard towers. 1 Neptune remained. 1 Pantsir had ammunition left. 47 seconds to impact. Sergeant Petrov fired his last 2 missiles. The Neptune's quantum computer, having analyzed Petrov's previous engagement patterns down to his reaction times, predicted he would aim for center mass with a 0.3-second lead. The Neptune executed a pre-programmed barrel roll at 15 meters altitude, a maneuver that should have been aerodynamically impossible, but was achievable for exactly 2.1 seconds due to ground effect over the flat terrain. The first missile missed by inches, its proximity fuse confused by the Neptune's wild rotation. The second clipped the tail, sending the missile tumbling end over end. But momentum is physics, and physics doesn't care about damage. The 870-kilogram missile, even tumbling out of control, continued toward its target at 600 miles per hour. At 050317, the Neptune slammed into bunker number 7. The shaped charge, lined with depleted uranium backed by aluminium powder, punched through 40 feet of concrete like a needle through cloth. The jet of superheated plasma reached 4,000 degrees Celsius. The thermobaric secondary charge followed, creating an overpressure wave that crushed everything before igniting the very air itself. Inside were 15,000 Grad rockets. Each contained 18 kilograms of high explosive. The chain reaction took 0.3 seconds to begin and would last for 7 hours. At 050320, the Atmaka struck Bunker 15, containing white phosphorus shells Russia claimed it didn't have. The resulting fire burned at 2,760 degrees Celsius and created a toxic cloud that would drift 15 kilometers downwind. The blast wave traveled at 8,000 meters per second, flattening everything within 500 meters. The mushroom cloud rose to 18,000 feet. Thousands of rockets blown skyward began raining down across 15 kilometers. The depot became a volcano of continuous detonations. Russian firefighters couldn't approach within 3 kilometers. The heat was melting their vehicles' tires at 2 kilometers. The fire would burn for 9 days. The strategic impact was immediate. Hour 1. Russian artillery in Kherson fell silent. Hour 6. Emergency ammunition convoys ordered from depots 400 kilometers away. Day 2. Ukrainian forces advanced 12 kilometers in Operation Storm Warning. Week 1. Russian artillery units rationed to 10 shells per day, down from 60. Week 2. Artillery ammunition expenditure dropped 70% across the southern front. Month 1. The Kremlin forced to purchase emergency ammunition from North Korea. The final tally: 127,000 artillery shells destroyed. 43,000 Grad rockets vaporized, 8,500 Smerch missiles eliminated, 12,000 white phosphorus rounds that didn't exist, $1.5 billion in ammunition gone, $300 million in infrastructure damage. 3-month supply erased. Ukraine's cost, $8.4 million total. The exchange ratio, 235 to 1. In Moscow, the aftermath was seismic. General Teplinsky was reassigned to Siberia. Colonel Sokolov suffered a heart attack and was medically retired. Lieutenant Dmitriev was court-martialed for negligence, though his real crime was being outsmarted. At 0530 hours, Dmitriev submitted his final report. They knew our every move before we made it. We were not defeated by missiles, we were defeated by patience. He was right. Ukraine had spent 6 months turning Russian predictability into a weapon more devastating than any missile. Every failed attack had been reconnaissance. Every intercepted drone had taught them something new. The operation's genius lay in the preparation. Oksana was already inside the phones of operators at 3 other depots. The next Neptune missiles would carry even more sophisticated AI. The fake dating app had been updated with new features to attract more users. Russia had built its military on Soviet principles: mass, firepower, intimidation. Ukraine was writing new principles: patience, precision, psychological devastation. Every Russian soldier in Crimea now knew their impregnable defenses were anything but. 3 weeks later, satellite imagery showed Russia had moved 40% of its ammunition out of hardened bunkers into dispersed field storage. They were so afraid of another precision strike that they made their ammunition more vulnerable to conventional attack. Ukraine had gotten inside their heads so thoroughly that Russia was defeating itself. In Washington, Pentagon analysts concluded Ukraine has demonstrated that a motivated defender with commercial technology can defeat any fixed defense. Recommend immediate review of all U.S. ammunition storage facilities. In Beijing, military planners reached a different conclusion. The Ukrainian model requires patience incompatible with PLA timeline for Taiwan. Recommend acceleration of quantum radar development. In Kiev, Major Kovalenko had taped a phrase above his desk: "The hunter who knows where the deer drinks needs only one arrow." Below it was a satellite photo of another Russian depot, marked with red circles and blue patrol routes. The photo was dated tomorrow. The lesson was clear. In the age of smart weapons and patient enemies, there's no such thing as an impregnable defense. There are only targets that haven't been studied long enough. Every pattern becomes a vulnerability. Every routine becomes a weakness. Every strength, properly understood, becomes a fatal flaw. The Sonakna Dolina Depot still smolders today, a 12-square-kilometer reminder that nowhere is safe, nothing is impregnable, and someone is always watching. And somewhere in Ukraine, Another young operator is staring at a screen, taking notes, being patient. The next depot is already dead. It just doesn't know it yet.